testing for Ebola is highly accurate. It's a PCR test of blood. So what does this mean? The next steps are basically threefold.
Soon, America, you will step into a booth, sidle up to a little portable cubicle, or perhaps even mark the ballot with that perfect number 2 lead pencil at home and choose your leaders in the midterm elections. You are, of course, doing your homework to learn about the candidates, where they stand on issues, which one has had the least Botox. But you need to look at something much more indicative of who and what they are. Let's welcome to Midpoint body language expert and author of Reading People, How to Understand People and Predict Their Behavior Anytime, Anyplace, which is scary if you're in my business. Wendy Patrick joins us. Wendy, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Scared to living daylights out of everybody in the building right now, Wendy. Here we go. All right, let's get right to it here because we have 3 examples, and we want to show these to people because everybody pretty much has heard what is being said here. We'll talk about it a little bit. But first of all, before we get to this, what is the one thing that you look for, the very first thing that you look for that tells you about that person in body language?
Well, I look for consistency. In other words, does what they look like match what they're saying? Does their demeanor match their words? Research shows that when it does, we believe them, we like them, and we trust them. When it doesn't, we are suspicious, and we're unlikely to vote for them, which is extremely relevant as we enter into campaign season.
All right, here we go. First of all, we're going to start for someone who is not campaigning, but certainly somebody in the news. Tom Frieden, who is the head of the Center for Disease Control. He certainly has been in the news an awful lot. He is trying to tell people, don't panic, everything's fine, we have Ebola under control. Needless to say, there's not a lot of people out there who are believing him at this point after what has happened in Dallas. So when you see Tom Frieden at this press conference making this speech, what is it that sticks in your mind, and what are we reading here?
One of the first things that I noticed is how nervous he looked, and who wouldn't be? I mean, here he is explaining that the Ebola has come to America. All eyes are on him worldwide as to what we're going to do about it. So one of the first things you notice is he is very effusive with his hands. He is punctuating his assurances with dominant hand gestures designed to really give confidence to what he's saying, because that's his job. He's trying to assure the American public that this disease is under control. But of course, even he doesn't know that for sure. It's a very hopeful speech, but he wants to exude as much confidence as he can. To his credit, his voice remains very steady throughout that address, and he did a really good job under the circumstances.
Would it be fair to say that those hand gestures mean perhaps he is not that confident in what he is saying, or he knows perhaps it is not entirely the truth?
Well, I think that he hopes it is the truth, as the rest of us do. But sometimes, as you mentioned, we do use hand gestures in order to instill confidence in others and in ourselves and what we are saying. These are his intentions, and he wants us all to know that this is the reassurance he's giving. But obviously, he's got a little bit of doubt, as we all do.
All right, next up, Julia Pierson, now the former head of the Secret Service, who was absolutely grilled when she had to appear in front of committee and talk about all the mistakes that were made at the White House. They really gave her absolutely no room whatsoever to move or no place to go. But when you look at that, it seems as if she's trying to say, I'm sorry, and she's trying to be authoritative. So how did she do with all the body language here?
Again, this is another tough hot seat to be in, and the mea culpa. We are a society of forgivers, but in order to forgive, we have to see one of 2 things. We have to see warmth, and then we also have to hear the words that accompany. In other words, you can't say I'm sorry and it ends up sounding like you've said my bad. There's a big difference. And one of the problems with her testimony is there was a lot of looking down. There was a lack of eye contact. She was probably very nervous and doing the absolute best that she could. But when we're looking at an apology and when we're judging the sincerity of an apology, we want to see that match up. We want to see the emotion match the message. And in her defense, the grilling she received made it very difficult to actually exude what she was hopefully trying to exude, which was a heartfelt apology coupled with resolution to fix the problems.
Well, isn't that part of it? You have to be tough if you're in a position of authority, but at the same time, Americans want to see emotion, or they see you as basically being an automaton, or as you pointed out, looking down a lot at the script, which means you're really just reading what somebody else prepared for you, and you're not quite sure of what you're saying, or if it's sincere in what you're saying.
Amen to that. You know, and along those lines, one of the terms most used to describe how she did on Capitol Hill was stone-faced. You don't want to give an apology while you're stone-faced. And, you know, part of what she had to say, if you just read a transcript of it, you might come away believing it was more heartfelt than had you actually watched the video. And that's one of the reasons that emotion is so important. You know, it's both warmth and competence that exudes leadership. You need both.
All right, 2 minutes left. Let's talk about the leader here. President Obama, his 60 Minutes speech, where he came out and made an awful lot of statements. He's very good at it. He's been doing this now for 6 years in the limelight. So what can we read from a president who obviously has been trained over and over again to not let us see a lot of negatives in what he's doing?
You know, as much as he's been trained, it is one thing after another for President Obama. And at the end of the interview, I think you saw a very telling expression on his face. It was almost a stare down at the end of that interview between he and the interviewer. It was, the questions got tougher and tougher, and then he was left with a pause at the end, an awkward pause, which he filled by, you know, by sort of doubling down on the admission he made at the end. And that's great. But I would say the same thing regarding his expression. It's not easy to be in that kind of a defensive position and be able to exude the genuineness of remorse, of not acting quicker, of not knowing what we should have known, not they or he, but what he should have known. And at the end, I think we saw the same kind of dynamic that we saw during the Secret Service Director's testimony on Capitol Hill. Is we saw an inability or maybe a moment of awkwardness, and sadly, that's how the interview ended, between what he was saying and his expression as to how he felt.
I only got about 30 seconds left. I have to ask you this. I have always told people that I always know when someone is being insincere when I shake their hand and they give me the dead fish handshake. Is that still fair to say if you're going to shake somebody's hand, give them the solid handshake and don't give them that little half thing?
You bet it is. And a handshake transmits so much of somebody's personality. And so if you've got a good one, do it when you meet somebody and do it when you're done with the conversation. Kind of the double whammy sets a really excellent impression.
There you go. Get Wendy Patrick to go ahead and take care of your politicians here, for crying out loud. Stop worrying about the rest and make sure that you now learn to read the body language. Wendy, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thanks so much. We'll look forward to the next time.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Take care. Later on this hour, what the world is saying about the Ebola outbreak in America is featured in News Call. And after the break, what the jokesters have been poking fun at when it comes to politics and politicians. Because quite frankly, when it comes to body language, we see an awful lot that there can be made fun of. That and a whole lot more coming up right here on Midpoint, where every day we question everything.
The Texas family of the man infected with Ebola says they're stuck in their home, which may be contaminated. I'm Rick Blackwell. This story tops your Newsmax Now update. A cleaning crew wasn't allowed to sanitize the apartment because they lack permits. Now, Thomas Eric Duncan's family says they don't know what to do with the linens he used during his stay. Meanwhile, an NBC freelance cameraman is on his way home to the United States after testing positive for the Ebola virus while working in Liberia. He's the 4th American to contract the disease. The U.S. Army tells troops and their families to be careful of what they post online. This comes after a new report on ISIS chatter, which points to the possibility of an attack on personnel or their families. A dramatic rescue caught on tape. Nearly 20 stories over the streets of Oakland, California. Take a look at this. Firefighters rescued 2 window washers trapped on a platform. Fortunately, the men were okay. That's your Newsmax Now update. More news coming your way in 30 minutes.